Hello again. Welcome to Ms. McGee's Critical Thinking class here at Fremont College. Good to have you. Today we're going to be talking about inferences, opinions, and assumptions. That's IOA, just to help you remember. So you're asking, what is an inference? What does it mean when we infer something? An inference in regular parlance would be a guess. Sometimes we make educated guesses, and sometimes we make uneducated guesses where we don't know all the facts. But we use inferences every day. We use inferences as to how much traffic we think there might be on the freeway on the way to work. We use inferences in terms of where we want to live, where we want to send our children. They're guesses. As I said, many times they're educated guesses where we've done research, but oftentimes we just have to use what we may call instinct. Say, for example, you happen to be at the airport on your way traveling afar, and you see a nun, a woman that's obviously dressed as a nun. She's got a collar, maybe a veil, seated, very prim. She's reading a Playboy magazine. Now, these are ideas that don't normally go together, so we would naturally, as human beings and critical thinkers, make a certain amount of inferences. What would we think if we saw that kind of a scene? She could be possibly doing research. We might guess that she's doing research. We might guess that perhaps she's going to visit a friend in a hospital and bringing them this magazine. Or we might infer that she plans to do something about perhaps never having Playboy again. We make all kinds of guesses. Some of them may be right, some of them may be not right. So when we're talking about inferences, we connect the dots. Think of inferences as in connecting the dots. As we'll talk about later, inferences differ from opinions and from assumptions in that regard. So just think about it as you go through life, the different ways in which you use your inferences. Inferences are also distinguished from facts. Facts, as we talked about before, are things, concepts, ideas that can be proven. Inferences, not always. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Again, think of an inference as a guess, an educated guess. The book has an excellent definition of infer on page 107, and I'm going to read it for you. The word infer comes from the Latin to interfere, bring, or to carry to. So keep that in mind. And of course, you're using your trusty dictionary that we talked about last time as well. Always have that available for these different concepts that we'll be going through. You can infer things through observation, and we talked a lot about observation. Through just seeing things, you can infer things. Say, for example, you see an older gentleman with a young person at a piano. An inference might be he's teaching that person how to use the piano, but that may not be a fact. He may just be resting at the piano and the young lady may be sitting there. He may be her teacher, or he may be just giving her attention and they happen to be seated at the piano. So again, we're making guesses, educated guesses as to what we observe, what we see. Now, why is that important for critical thinking to make inferences? Why is that important? Because as we talked about critical thinking, it's thinking outside the box, it's examining all sides of an issue. So when you're making these educated guesses, it doesn't hurt or there's nothing wrong with a wrong guess, so to speak, until we know the facts. The people that use inferences a lot, as you can imagine, would be police detectives. They would infer certain things from maybe a crime scene, the way maybe a body is placed, evidence and so forth. Doctors make inferences all the time. If a person comes in with a cough, he may infer right away, make an educated guess as to what might be wrong with that person. So that's what we mean by an inference. And again, our e-cafe for this chapter, we talk about inferences, and there's a wonderful Doonesbury cartoon, and Doonesbury is a very well-known cartoonist. Many times he'll tackle political subjects, and this one is particularly funny when he examines or he caricatures inferences. So be sure you take a look at that on page 124 of the text. Generalizations, those are also inferences. When we speak in general, we talk about the big picture when we talk about generalities. When we speak of specifics, we think of individual, idealistic, smaller things. For example, in general, we can say the weather in California is beautiful. Generally, the sun is always shining. But we all know that we have many days, or often have days, where it's raining. We can think of days maybe in the November, December where it's raining. And so that would kind of throw out the notion that California always has beautiful weather. So an inference is, again, a general picture. A specific is something very smaller. Okay, now, just to kind of practice understanding inferences, on page 125, there's an excellent exercise. You're going to be analyzing a newspaper article. And the theme of this article is tougher grading, better for students. That's the headline, what we call the headline, the main idea. Tougher grading, better for students. Thoroughly read this article. It starts on page 125, and it ends on page 126. After you read the article, I want you to do a couple of things for me. Take a blank sheet of paper and create 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, just at the top of your page, 1, 2, 3, 4. On the very first column, after you've read the article, tougher grade makes for better students, you're going to say, or you're going to write the data that is claimed in that article. What is that article really saying? The headline tells you half the story right there, but what else does it say? So that will be your first inference that you're going to write on this paper. The second one would be a specific quote. And when I say a quote, I mean what someone has said, and that's in quotation marks in the article. So the inference is expressed in what quotation a spokesman has said, an expert has said about this particular subject matter. But then your third would be, what information is missing? What information do you have a question about? After you read the article, you'll have questions in your mind. So what would be the most pertinent question you have related to this? Because again, we're critical thinkers, we're making inferences. That would be the third column. On the very last column, you would write your own sentence about the story, tougher grading, better for students. You make your own inferences about the words you've read, the sentences, the opinions. Okay, so it takes a lot of thought, careful thought. You may need to read the story, the article, more than once. And this will kind of prepare you and get you primed for when you read other newspaper articles. Because as we know, media, newspaper, what we read on the internet, very prominent in all of our lives. But it's important too that we read these things critically, that when we have inferences or questions or we make assumptions, that we do so as critical thinkers. So that's an excellent exercise, and that's again on page 125. And when we're building arguments, and which is what much of what this course is about, we do use inferences. We use educated guesses to build an argument to state our own case. So again, facts and inferences they can be the same. Educated guesses can be the same as a fact, but they are not always fact. Again, think in terms of the nun that we saw at the airport where she is reading a Playboy. The fact might be, if we were to know more, is that she actually liked Playboy, but with our educated critical thinking, we would say perhaps there's a different explanation for what we're seeing. Detectives and consultants use inferences quite a bit, doctors as well. Inferences are built on connecting the dots. We connect the dots to come up with our own opinion, assumptions, our own facts about what we're seeing, hearing, observing. Responsible report writing and descriptive writing also are important. We make inferences, and that's about the media, what we read in the newspaper, what we see on the internet, what we hear on the radio. Anytime we're getting information about current events, world events, we have to make a lot of inferences, but we have to think critically also to say, well, does this make sense to me? And as I always say, and I tell my students all the time, just because we read it on the internet or we read it in the newspaper, that doesn't always necessarily make it a fact or make it true. So as we grow in critical thinking, we'll be better able to make our own inferences, connect our own dots, or make our own educated guesses. So that is chapter 4. Make sure that you do that exercise, and I'll see you next time.